Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining for this session of the 2020 Virtual Executive War College. Please welcome our session moderator, Robert Michel, Editor-in-Chief of the Dark Report.
For joining us today, and a few housekeeping announcements. Want to thank the folks that have sponsored us. They're up on your slide. And for app support during this event, please look at the community tab on the bottom of your app, in your mobile app. Or if you're using your desktops, look at the left sidebar of the web top and you have an Ask Organizers Anything. They'll be glad to help you if there's any technical difficulties with viewing the session or getting the audio. And I would like to remind everybody that after this live event, the session's recorded and it will be up in the mobile app and on your desktop app as an on-demand presentation. So you and your colleagues have an opportunity to review this afterwards as much as you would like. And then over the course of the session, I encourage you to provide questions in your chat box to our moderator, and the moderator will feed them to me as the chair of today's sessions, and I'll be glad to engage our two esteemed speakers with those questions. And what we're going to address today is what's happened with anatomic pathology in the immediate pre-pandemic period, after the pandemic has hit, and what kind of strategies our two speakers' respective pathology groups are pursuing as we go forward. And there's much to be shared, and there's still much to be learned. Our first speaker this morning will be Cory Roberts, M.D., M.B.A., who is President and Chairman, CEO of ProPath in Dallas. He graduated from the University of Nebraska Medical Center, so he's probably a red and white Cornhusker through and through. Whether they play football this year, we'll soon find out. But he's a very accomplished individual who has shown great executive leadership for his group. And following him will be Patty Sipes. She's currently the CEO of Insight Diagnostics. And Patty has had a very productive career at such places like Myriad Genetics, LabCorp, Pamel, Esoterics before it was acquired. And she's been on the firing line at Insight here, because one of the interesting things you'll find as Patty shares the Insight story is they were in the process of launching a brand new clinical lab company in the month of March this year. So I don't want to take up too much of our speaker's time, and I'll turn this over to Dr. Roberts, and he will share with you the ProPath journey during this most unusual pandemic. So Dr. Roberts, it's all yours.
Thank you, Robert. And indeed, I am, hopefully you can see my screen there. Indeed, I am a Husker, but the way they've been playing lately, maybe it's just as well we don't have a football season this year, so we'll wait and see. But thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to hearing what Patty has to say and what you all would like to hear from us. But ProPath, just first of all, just to give you a little bit of background, we are based in Dallas. We have a nationwide outpatient practice. I've just thrown up some numbers along those lines. You can see nearly 500 employees becomes important when it comes to the PPP. We are very glad to be just under 500 employees.
Cory, your screen share hasn't quite caught on.
Oh.
Yep. So hit your little screen share at the very bottom.
Yep. Sorry.
That's okay. This is all a new experience for all of us.
The slides look great. Wait till you see them. There, now you should have it, right?
I haven't come up yet. Natalie, you want to give us a hand?
It said yes.
So when you put in screen share, then it brings up all your open windows.
Yep.
and then hit the window you want and the little blue share button in the lower
Yeah,
right.
sorry, I thought
There
I
we
did it
go.
and I missed it. I apologize. So here's an overview of ProPath. So we are about 50 doctors and 500 employees. We have facilities in 3 states and employees in 11, based here in Dallas, and about 75% of our work comes from throughout the state of Texas. But we have clients in about 45 states. And we have some unique things. We are 100% physician owned, like my colleagues at Insight, and we have about 26 hospitals that we staff. But the lion's share of our business and our revenue comes from our outpatient cases. And I put some high volume numbers there. Dermatology or dermatopathology is a big part of our business. We do about 800 cases a day. We do about 700 GI cases and about 1,000 pap smears a day. So that's who ProPath is. Here's some other numbers that that might be of interest as we go forward. This is my Fitbit for any of you that wear a Fitbit. And so this is my resting heart rate, typically at 62, 63, going back for many months. And then as you approach March, things change. This is March 22nd and 23rd. And so I saw about a 10% increase in my resting heart rate as we entered the pandemic. And of course, every state was a little different. In Texas, we had our first case about March 10th. So that coincided very nicely with some interesting things at work, as you can imagine. So what were our 3 pillars of the response? That you didn't see my title slide, but that's how we broke it down when we came to this, this unforeseen and certainly unprecedented instance. So the first pillar was safety. We certainly wanted to keep all of our team members, physicians, non-physicians, everybody in our team safe, keep them safe both at work and at home. The second pillar to buttress that was communication. We knew in this time of uncertainty revolving around the science and the medicine of it, let alone for lay people. And so we knew we had to communicate a great deal, both internally and then to the team. And we did that through every avenue that you can imagine. And I'm sure many of you did the very same things. But we started it very early and we were very intentional about that. And then finally, all of those had to lead to long-term viability. So this is something that our team heard me say many times every day and in town hall meetings and things, is that everything we were doing was really focused on making sure we had a company to come back to for 50 more years. We've been around for 54 years. We were not looking to maximize anything in the immediacy. We were not looking to get through the next year. We were looking to create a situation where we could maintain what we had built over 54 years. So that was really important. And that meant we were going to suffer some pain in real time. We were going to prepare for the worst case scenario, and that led to immediate cash conservation early in March before we even had cases on the books in Texas, knowing that it was coming. So on the safety component, there were several components of that. And one is that we were very clear we were going to be science driven. We were going to follow CDC guidelines as a baseline and add on to those. We made it a great effort to tell our team to not listen to celebrities, sports stars, neighbors, or certainly not politicians for fear of what might be driven home. So we relied on science, and we had evidence for everything that we did and implemented, whether that was removing chairs and all the things that people did in order to physically space people and keep them safe. I think the other component was we made an intentional effort to talk to our team about all of these safety measures we were making inside our headquarters would all be for naught if people went home at night and had birthday parties for kids and socialized and didn't follow those same rules. They would bring it right back into our team. So we really talked about a lot about what their lives should look like following these same guidelines when they were home and not just at work. Quarantining, of course, is a common component of COVID, but I put this up here to mention that we quarantined people very early on when they had high-risk travel. We had somebody on a cruise the first week of March. When they came back, we quarantined them for 14 days. We quarantined people that had international travel. We were aggressive on that, looking at safety over production. So again, a long-term view that if we were going to suffer some short-term production issues, because at the time our volumes were completely normal. And we had contingency plans for if we did have suffer greater losses through quarantine or illness. We wanted to make sure we talked about both our on-site and off-site folks. We have 50 phlebotomists scattered around a few states. We have salespeople and production people in other states, another lab now in Massachusetts. So we wanted to make sure we talked and spoke to everybody the same way, even though there were some geographical differences. So we did communicate with our clients that are phlebotomists. I asked them to take care of our clients or our patients, well, our employees rather, just as much as they would their own employees. And I counted on them for that. And I told them our first priority was our employees' safety. And if that was compromised, we would remove them. But up until then, we wouldn't. We made sure they all had proper equipment, phlebotomists particularly, as well as our couriers. We have a large courier network that farms out of here in Houston and Atlanta. So we made sure that was true, and we communicated with our own people and told them what we were doing to keep them safe. And then before the bubble concept became popular at the M.B.A. and others, we really adopted that internally. We treated this building, this headquarters, as our own bubble. We wanted people to self-report. We had a flow chart asking questions that the CDC had given starting in early March. And so again, before there were even cases reported here in Texas, and we didn't let anybody self-diagnose. We ultimately ended up with one case that entered our building out of 500 employees, and that team member did not follow our guidelines, or they would have never been in our building. And our first guideline was, if you're sick, stay home. And we didn't get any more specific than that, and that was intentional. We didn't want anybody self-diagnosing, and we wanted to provide as much medical guidance as we could, but we made it clear we are not your doctor, even though we are doctors. We wanted them to seek professional care in this area. So that's how we treated the headquarters. With regard to the second pillar of communication, these are really self-evident items in my view, but they certainly are important in this kind of situation. We always lead with honesty and transparency, even when we had to communicate uncertainty. If uncertainty was the truth and the honest situation we're in, we communicated that. We tried to fill in as many blanks as possible, and I'm a big believer that reality is never as bad as fantasy. So we would rather tell people something, even if it was, yes, we're going to furlough, or yes, we're going to reduce hours, and yes, volumes are down 70%. We wanted to say that rather than have them fill in something even worse. So we did that through lots of communication efforts, including town halls and emails. Town halls ranged from in-person, when that was still a thing, if you can believe it or not, and without masks, to video and recorded ones. So we were doing about 2 town halls every week to the entire population of the company, and then eventually 1 a week, and now we're doing them still at about 2, or every 2 weeks rather. And our first communication was February 27th. As I said, we didn't have a case here until the 10th. We did the same thing on campus and off, and a lot of it is repetition, telling people the same things, and then also listening. So we listened a lot to what their concerns were. We created an FAQ section for our team members, and we had a question email set up simply for COVID questions from our team members so they could ask, and then we could address those in town halls in various formats. Every format you can imagine we used to try and get our point across, and that included in-person and phone calls and videos and everything else. Again, same thing on the owner side and on the higher level employee side. So we have communicated with our board a great deal, far more than we normally would. We started daily executive meetings, daily team meetings that used to be weekly. We started those daily the first week of March, and we actually continue those today. We call them check-ins now. We find them very useful. So they were, of course, initially lasted about an hour. Now they're scheduled for 30 minutes, and they might be 10 or even 5 minutes, but we check in every day and around the horn of everybody, COVID and non-COVID related. We communicated with the groups as they fell out. So as we furloughed a group, we would communicate with that group directly, that subgroup, in whatever position they were in, as well as the greater population. And again, the main theme was being consistent in what we were saying, and also resistant to pressures for us to let down our guard. We were so early in adopting protective measures like masking and other things that it wasn't being done where everybody else had friends working, and they thought, as many people thought, we were being too aggressive and it was unusual. Now, of course, they don't think that, but we had to resist the urge to let our guard down. Also on the video communication, we immediately asked people to use cameras so that we could see people. And where people didn't have cameras, we of course bought a whole bunch of cameras so that everybody had one on their computer so we can see people and try not to lose that personal interaction. And we had great team members, great employees that understood They were scared, but we had so many people, and I imagine Patty had similar circumstances, that came up, offered to be furloughed because they felt they could handle it better than others, offered to take pay cuts proactively, offered to sacrifice their position over somebody else's position. So that was really nice. Then the final pillar is the long-term viability. That was really built around this cash flow model. And that cash flow model we started building, and I say we, really our controller and CFO, Alan Whitehead and John Stokes respectively, started that model on about March 10th and then continued to tweak it. We followed that with weekly meetings looking at it. But basically what we did was we started looking at every possible way while revenues were still flowing in completely normally to conserve cash. And so that model played a key role in everything we did in forecasting, in predicting, in returning people to normal salary levels. Was really dependent on what that model looked like. And we watched it at a weekly basis, which is really unheard of in our forecasting process. So what did we do? We did, I'm sure, the same things that many of you did in your businesses. We held accounts payable. We already fortunately had a very deep and strong banking relationship. That's not something you can really gin up in a couple of days, particularly during a pandemic. So we were fortunate in that, and I'd recommend anybody that doesn't have that to prepare for one now. And so we had a very large line of credit already in our hands. We made sure that was secured and available to us. We, of course, did a hiring freeze. We reduced hours, stopped all CapEx, still have a corporate travel ban. That was predominantly for safety reasons, of course, but it also has the secondary benefit of saving money. And then furloughs. So our furloughs ended up being, from the longest furlough was 3 weeks and the shortest was 1 week. And the main groups were 3 and 2 weeks, but we did employ those. People asked right away if they were going to lose jobs. February 27th in that first communication, followed by a town hall, those were the questions I got. Are we going to fire people, lose jobs, that kind of thing? And I said the same thing. I don't want to. That'll be the last thing that we do, but we will do whatever it takes to maintain our long-term longevity. And if that includes that, we will employ it, and we'll have to. So we ultimately ended up doing so later in March. Again, we looked at that cash flow model on a weekly basis. We started a new process that we continue today where we post our daily cash position. In addition to our current cash deposit in the lockbox, we include our cash position where we include our line of credit number. We include our, at the time, the PPP number, those types of things. And we also implemented pay cuts. So really in March, we did retroactive pay reductions down to a certain level of folks at varying rates. So the owners had to be the first dollars cut, of course, since the owners took a 50% pay cut retroactively for the pay period of March. Ultimately, executives started at 25%, but ended up at 50%. And then the owners took zero pay in April and May. And we did that throughout the organization to a certain level of management, with the lowest cut being 10%. And we continued that in April. I'll show you then how that ended up. Then I think that other component you've heard, the measure twice, cut once reference, and that's really how we viewed this. We did not go into this thinking there will be government relief. We treated it, no matter how far the discussions went, no matter how big the dollars were, we planned on no government relief. We also planned on there being no second chance. So we were not going to get relief and then say, well, we'll get another swing at this later. We assumed we would not. So even on the PPP loan, we spent a lot of time thinking about if and how we would bring people back and spend those funds versus at the time taking it as a low interest loan, just again to make sure we were here for the long haul. But we definitely cut early and much earlier than our competitors and like businesses here in Texas, because the COVID was not yet rampant. But our plan and our intention, and we think we can successfully restore people and even perhaps fill in that hole. We certainly had a lot of outside consultants. I am sure all of you spent many days on webinars. We did all of those things. We had legal, banking, outside legal, in addition to our in-house counsel, accounting, legislative, every kind of consultant you can imagine to try and look at this. And again, the message and the action was owners had to lead the way. Owners had to be the first one to cut, the last ones restored, and they were great, frankly. I'm very proud of the ownership group. And we really wanted to protect the most vulnerable, so our plan was not to protect the high earners first, it was just the opposite. We wanted to protect those people that had less of a lifeline, the hourly workers, and we indeed did that, and I would do that again. I'll just say that our preparation began 3 years ago, and that's obviously a bit of a misnomer, but I think the decisions that we made as a company now approaching 4 years ago, and the decisions anybody makes as a company now are the types of decisions that lead to your readiness for things that you can't foresee. So in that sense, we made a lot of past decisions that ultimately ended up being opportunities in this type of setting, and I'm very grateful for our forward thinking, and it's a great reminder for me and for all of us probably to think about your strategic plan and how that gives you flexibility. So some of those decisions were, and some of these are minor and very common in other industries, but we had already allowed a lot of flexibility in work from home for those people that can do it. Thank goodness we did that, because that became a big component of what we did. Along those lines, we had Office 365 and switched our phone system to a voice over internet. So our entire phone system about 2 years ago switched to an internet-based system whereby you can spin up your office anywhere you have internet. So for instance, our 2 call centers can and are currently at home all over the place, but they can video with us through 8x8 is a Zoom type platform and message, and it's all secure, and the phone rings to an office number and not their personal number. So we're very pleased with that decision, and it's all secure. Disaster recovery, business continuity planning had been going on for some time with some area labs, and that's obviously a key thing that we've not had to implement. Open communication is a culture change that we made 3+ years ago, and really critical to this being successful as well. And we also created a charitable employee assistance fund earlier this year that has about $13,000 in it. It's a separate 501c3 run by a separate group of folks and a separate board that I am not on. And it can dole out assistance, monetary assistance to team members that need it. And so that is also great. I think we adopted an aggressive growth stance, an aggressive organic growth stance. And so we've been intentionally growing about 10% a year for the past 3 years. But in addition to that, we took on an acquisition state of mind, and we actually completed one. Interestingly, it closed on February 28th, not fantastic timing, but a fantastic group in Massachusetts. And I say all that just to say that those types of things gave us the diversity that could withstand some of the geographic variances of the disease and some of the financial pressures that it put on. We brought on digital imaging, bought that at the end of 2019, and we were able to then implement it during this time. And we really empowered our team as part of our culture change so that people weren't sitting around wondering what to do, but actually making decisions based on training and based on empowerment. So the opportunities that we saw, we set up a separate set of goals for the 8-week PPP period. We really viewed that as a separate time frame from the rest of the company, and intentionally said, what are we going to do with this? And so among the things that we did, we wrote about 16 marketing articles from our physician group during that time. We ramped up our research to the tune of creating about 26 AI projects and scanning about 7,000 slides on our Aperio scanner in conjunction with 2 groups that we're partnered with, in Perspectum and Reveal. Our sales team had 37 video conference meetings daily during that time period. They dissected their territories by zip code, entered all of those data into Salesforce. We had clients do training sessions with them, clinicians. We had internal physicians from ProPath do training sessions, and they did their own, but they made great progress and data-wise during that time. And we validated primary reads. We prepared the workspace for return. We have clear shower curtains hanging between embedding stations and microtomy stations as another layer in addition to masks, plexiglass, those types of things. We were able to merge our call centers during that time. We validated a number of assays. And then charity is a key component of what we do, and So Hope is a charity in Guatemala, where we read 800 pap smears for Guatemalan women in conjunction with Hologic and So Hope for free. And we partnered with Vocal Alcove, a homeless children's shelter here in Dallas. So we wanted to make headway on some of our core values, and service is one of those. So if you look at our timeline quickly, this is it. So January and February is a blip. March 5th, we said no more handshakes. March 10th, we said no more visitors in or out, and no more in-person meetings. We went to virtual meetings on our 8x8 platform right away. By March 11th, there was the first case in Dallas. We had already started sending people home, anybody that could work home in a graduated and prioritized fashion. By the 23rd, that was complete. April 5th, we implemented masking, which we still have here. If you leave an office or an enclosed setting, you have to wear a mask in the building. On the 3rd, we applied for our PPP loan, and on the 9th, we got about $7.5 million deposited, so we were very quick in that turnaround time. Monday was the 13th, and on the 13th, we made the decision to bring everybody back that had been furloughed. Certain caps based on the PPP loan for annual salaries were in place, but we brought everybody back even though business was still markedly down. And that's when we began those PPP separate goals. June 1, while a lot of our competitors were cutting salaries, cutting hours, and cutting and furloughing people because of cash flow crunches, we actually returned everybody to 100% because of the aggressive measures that we took early on. By that time, there were maybe some people starting to complain, but then they were grateful that we were able to bring them back. Simultaneously, we gave several $100s in bonuses to each employee outside of the executive team and physicians at the end of May in that pay period out of our own pockets, separate from the PPP fund as well, just to show that we felt their pain. We now scan a QR code to enter the building that asks those same questions in order to keep people out of our bubble that don't belong and keep us safe, and that brings us to today. So a lot of communication, a lot of effort, but a lot of things that went well and some things we could probably do better as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. We can give Dr. Roberts a virtual hand of applause for his great work. One question's come through, and then we'll have Patty Sipes present. Would you talk a little bit about the executive structure at your group? And who was, out of all the pathologists, how do you create an executive committee that makes decisions that the other pathologists will live with?
Yeah, so definitely the board was key. We have a 7-person board, myself included, and they were key in supporting everything we did. I can tell you when we did the pay cuts to the owners, my plan was to go and ask for 25 to 50% pay cut for owners and then 25% a month going forward. It was they who said, let's just do 50% for March and let's go to 0 thereafter. That's just easier. And so they led the way in action and in word, and they were great. Separately, we have a medical director group, and they were excellent and key in running some of these scientific and medical ideas for safety reasons. So it wasn't just me making the decisions. I would share it with them, and they had more deal of expertise, more than I do. So great group.
Well, that's good. Thank you very much. And let's make a switch to Patty Sipes in Spokane, Washington, also known as the Inland Empire. Patty, it's all yours.
Hello there. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I've got to say, Dr. Roberts, I told him before we started that his slides were far more fancy than mine. So I hope my content is just as good. I took a little bit of a different approach as far as the how are we surviving COVID. I think that a lot of us were, how bad was it? As many of you might know, we actually opened up a clinical laboratory in the middle of March. So that grand opening wasn't the most ideal time frame, although we'd been planning it for over a year. You know what, it gave us some actual opportunity. So since volumes were down in the beginning, it actually gave us that time to work out our kinks, which is very helpful with a new LAS system, a new billing system, new EMRs going on, new phlebotomists and PSCs that certainly allowed us some ramp up time. And we ended up finding out that during all of the time period when we had issues with collection kits and putting them all together, the PSCs and some of the staff actually were very helpful in the manpower that we needed to actually get those all put together. It took a lot more time than one would think. And from an AP perspective, I believe that we experienced a very similar reduction that all of the other pathology practices could identify with. 62% decrease in biopsies in March, 45% in non-GYN, 65% in GYN accessions. This all occurred within a few weeks, and our cash projections were that we would have a 65% decrease over the next 2 to 3 months. So yes, we really had to move fast, and knowing that, as Cory had mentioned, that many pathology and medical groups have a business model that don't carry over a significant amount of cash year over year. So we had to move fast to ensure the long-term viability, because yes, that was our absolute goal, was to have a company for our employees to return to. That was absolutely number one. So what did we do first? Our first step, as he had kind of mentioned, I'm going to mention it just with a lot of emphasis, is that we met with our bank. We wanted to know day one, what did we have as an option here? We were planning worst case scenario, and we wanted to know, okay, what type of flexibility did they have? Because although we weren't thinking that we would have any issues with covenants, starting up a new laboratory, obviously we had more going on than we might have had in the past. So because that relationship was so good, we met with them day one, and they said, first of all, don't worry about your covenants. This year, everyone gets a buy. Next year is a different story. This year, everything is good. Do not be concerned. We also wanted to know, okay, what were our options? They worked with us very well on that, and we wanted to know, did we qualify? We are under 500 employees. We're about close to 400 now with 50 pathologists, and we're in 5 states. So we certainly are a presence here in the Northwest, but we needed to know, okay, can you fund that loan? When will you take applications, and how quickly can you approve it and then fund it? Because although we were looking at all of our projections for what happens if we get no funding, we then did the same amount of projections as to what would happen with funding. So we met with the board literally weekly to go over every single figure, every single communication plan, to make sure that we were in the know. So knowing that the loan processing time was critical, there were many entities that actually went for the PPP loan, and they didn't get it in time, and because of that, the funds ran out, and they did not have that. So that was probably our absolute first move. And where were we in line? Because we were with Umpqua Bank, it's a local bank here. We were one of their largest clients within our geography. But the key piece was there's a long line. Where were we in it? So when could they process it? And were we guaranteed those funds? Because they cut off accepting applications after 2 days. That's how many they received. So acting very quickly here, timing was going to be very important. So we did go ahead. We did receive the PPP funds literally within, we applied, had approval within 3 days, and then we have the funds in our account, a little over $5 million, about 7 days later. So it went actually much faster than we thought. The HHS funds, we put information together. There was a surprise at one point. We actually had a call from accounting saying, we just got this big deposit in our account. Is that our money? Are we sure? Because they didn't notify you it was coming. All of a sudden you just had a big deposit, and everyone gets nervous saying, is that a mistake? Why is it there? There were zero guidelines as far as how we could use it, so we didn't really dare spend it. It came out kind of piecemeal. So, and then there was another deposit that came in far higher than we ever expected. So the HHS funds in and of itself were somewhat of a mystery. But our next order of business was now, how do we survive April and May? We thought that by June we'd start getting some of the volumes back, and we were extraordinarily conservative with our worst case scenario. In fact, we were better. We performed better than what our worst case scenario was, which is always a good thing. So we wanted to ensure that we stayed intact, and we wanted to make sure with our employees, there was no question that a reduction was necessary. We had lower volumes. We didn't know, what's the best way to go about it. I don't think any one of us has a perfect way. I think we all were working with the best information that we had at the time. So we were adamant that we would do furloughs, no layoffs, and we did do a set of furloughs in April and May. Pathologists were a part of that, as well as employees, and the pathologists did take a rather large pay cut for those months. We did actually, to help our employees, this was huge for us. We wanted to make sure that anyone who was furloughed, we paid all of their benefits, because nothing's worse than having a furlough situation, but you can't pay for your benefit premium. How are we going to do that? We had situations set up if they had an issue, but more importantly, we just went ahead and paid those premiums. We did not change the 401k match at all. And another piece to ensure that we had longevity was to add an additional revenue source. And I've got to say that was the game changer for us, because that's where the laboratory came in very handy. Although it wasn't ideal to start in March, the fact that we had that structure in place really, really helped us. And what I'd say as far as, I haven't gone into a lot of detail of what we did on the safety piece, which Cory did, which I think was certainly a great ad. We did do temperature checks. No one could come in the building without it. We had attestations people had to follow. We had mask requirements. And actually, we only had one person in this entire time who came down with COVID, and they were in a very small department. No one else became infected because of how we handled the quarantine process. And we actually, when we were getting the antibody test up and running, only 2 people tested with antibodies, which I don't know if it's good or bad because the herd immunity was not happening. The person who had been infected tested positive, and then we allowed all of the employees and family members to be tested. One child of an employee that went to school in New York, that individual tested for antibodies. But it was interesting, we really prevented any spread. We had been coming, the people who were in the office were coming in for they've come in for a good 5 months. We have not had any additional infections. People have been very good at home. And then we did implement a lot of work from home. We do have the Office 365 and voice over, so people could work from home and plug into their computer and take billing customer service calls all day long. Same with client services. So that had worked out really, really well. And we were able to stay quite productive from that standpoint. But what made the difference for us? I want to give a couple tips on what did we do that really kind of made a difference. It sounds very basic, but we assigned a project manager. I wish we had done it from day one. We actually spent 3 weeks without one, and we realized very quickly that there were too many items to keep track of. The amount of detail, and this is probably where Cory said the heart rate went up. I haven't actually done a graph, and I think I'm going to do it because I remember that my resting heart rate was like 61. Sometimes it went down to 59, and I thought, wow, okay, I was in shape, that's good. But then it was going and it was reading far higher. And I would go and look at it just on a daily basis, and you'd get that little bubble that says, what happened here? It went up to 130. What were you doing? I was like, stress, stress, stress. So it was, people were exhausted from the lab coming up. They were exhausted now from COVID. So now we were really looking at, we need to keep people intact too because they're tired. Some people never skipped a beat, and in fact, some of their workload went up 30%. Some just never went down, so we're watching that right now. But the project manager really helped. It helped us add structure because the structure was going to be imperative. Communication, yes, is one of Dr. Roberts' pillars. We had to make sure that we had great communication. We did have daily huddles, which made a huge difference. And then we immediately made a COVID pro forma. So we had our cash projection with funding, we had our cash projection without funding, and then we had the COVID only pro forma. Because if you take a look at it, we had a lot of employees commenting, you are spending millions of dollars on reagents, what's going on? Because it is expensive. And then, okay, we see how much you're billing and bringing in, where's our merit increases? So, there was a lot there that we did a COVID pro forma specifically to say, okay, if we hire these people, what is it going to cost? What are we spending on reagents? What is our margin so that we could communicate that very clearly? We had detailed metrics, and this is something that we didn't start first, and I would say if we could have done it a little bit sooner than we did, we would have been better off, because what happened was we had to hire. We heard other individual entities that were hiring 20, 30, 40 people. We didn't want to keep going back for approvals. Because when you're hiring that many, the board is going to get involved. This is not a typical budget situation, and you're spending millions on reagents. We needed approvals up front and ready to go. So we actually did a metrics, all departments that could be impacted, from phlebotomy, from billing, from creating kits, from accessioning, which actually ended up being a far bigger deal because it's manual. We literally said, as our volumes hit X, this is what our actual employment should be in each area. And what was interesting, though, is that what we didn't put in, and I'll put it on the next slide, is that we had no idea how long background checks would take. So we hired 23 people in the month of July, which was fast and very good. We're still hiring many more, but it takes 10 to 14 days for a background check. So when you need to move and move fast, every 110 accessions, you have a body, right? So if we need enough staff to do 4,000 tests a day, that's a lot of people that need hiring. So background checks, hiring, how many can you onboard at one time? That came into play, and we actually hadn't thought about that. So another piece that helped us were having good relationships with our local and state officials. The Congressional Office and Department of Health and Senate, I cannot tell you how much they helped us. At the very beginning, when we had, we were bringing up COVID testing, which, by the way, we brought up the Hologic Panther Fusion, and then we also brought up the Quidel, and then we have a partnership with WSU that we are the pre and post analytic. They run the test. They brought a veterinarian laboratory up to do medicine on humans. So we had 3 different platforms that we utilized because there was such issue with the supply chain. We couldn't get initial reagents on the Panther Fusion to even get the test validated. I called Congress. I had a call back within a day. I was on with their chief of staff. They connected me with Senate and Department of Health, as well as HHS and the White House Task Force. So if those contacts had not been made, I don't think we would have gone as fast as we did. And then LinkedIn, it helped. It seems so basic, but that network helped me tremendously. We had issues not only with reagents, we had issues with pipette tips, of all things, plastic pipette tips, filtered. That became a big issue, and we at one point got to 2 to 3 days supply. And if we didn't get those in, our COVID testing was shut down. And we were testing about half the population in the state. So those local and state officials really, really helped us out. And I still stay in very close touch with them. And, you know, I think even some people called the NIH for some help on my behalf. So I have to apologize to them. I think they got way too many phone calls than they wanted. It wasn't me, it was other people trying to help me, but I fully appreciate what they've done. And as far as what could we have done better, the reality is we didn't take a lot of risk up front. If we had taken more risk with supply orders, I believe we could have been far more ahead of the game. We have one entity that we know of that they didn't think, they just ordered, they went to town, and you know what, it paid off for them because they had a lot of supply. We didn't take as much risk because it was such a high dollar amount. When we're looking at buying reagents, it was $5 million, $10 million to order these reagents and stock up. For a company that, you know, you look at your annual revenue and you're looking at a big chunk of that ordering in just reagents, it makes people nervous. You know, what's going to happen? No one knew what the testing need would be. We had an idea, but we had no idea that when an outbreak hit, how our volumes would spike. We literally saw a 20 to 30% week over week volume increase. So when we looked at our metrics, we thought, okay, we're good. And then when it jumped so high, we had to say, okay, we need to get in a different gear, which is extra high gear. And that's where the heart rate went up even more because we had to move quickly and we needed people. We could have also identified alternative supply sources faster. And for anyone here watching, anytime something comes up, I think we had too many eggs in one basket. Well, I don't think, I know that we did. So when it came time to get alternatives, we didn't have as many because it had never really been an issue like it is today. That is where on LinkedIn, I had a lot of people, and whoever's out there, you know who you are, thank you for what you did. I was able to get some alternative sources that worked quite well for us, especially on the tip piece. And we should have said yes to the Panther reagents. We used the Panther Fusion side, and for anyone who uses Hologic, there are 2 sections of the instrument. We were using the Fusion, and we turned down reagents on the Panther side, which we kick ourselves daily for that. But here's what happened. We had the Quidel ready to get up. It was supposed to go up the next day. So we thought, well, we're covered. We should be good. There were validation problems. It happens. Everyone's trying to go fast. Some things happen, and it ended up being literally a minor setting. It was kind of funny how simple it was, but when we're working so hard, sometimes you just don't see that detail because you're so deep into it. So we said no, and, you know, just big mistake. We should have really taken more risk and just gone for it, and we could have hired faster. The background checks, I don't know what can be done with officials. I've certainly asked this, but this is something that for anyone who's looking at hiring and hiring quickly, that was something we did not put in the equation. They take 10 to 14 days. And we did hire and say, well, it's contingent upon the background and drug screen, right? Well, that bit us. We will not be doing that again, because then the background check came back, oh, by the way, 2 felonies and a misdemeanor. Okay, wrong choice. So we are not going to be hiring until that's done. We learned only in one, and it was for 2 whopping days, but that takes a long time. If there's anything that can be done to move that faster, is something that I would even look into. I would have looked into, but it was nothing that came up on our radar. And with onboarding, hindsight 2020, we never realized the true bandwidth of our managers and supervisors to be able to train. Because if you think of it, we're adding 20, 30, 40 employees. We're adding multiple molecular techs, which, some people say, why can't you get more techs? Well, molecular techs don't grow on trees. Isn't that amazing? You never thought you'd need as many, and now you need 20. So just trying to find them, get them in, and then how many can you train at one time? When your department wasn't super large, and now you're adding this many people, that really came into play. And we had to be aware of our own people and what they could do, and they were getting burnt out. So with all of these hires, we're going strong. We're going strong for 3-4 months in a row now. We had to say, okay, wind it down. We aren't going to hire, 30 people. We're going to put it down and ask them how many they can handle, because that was more important to keep our employees whole. And it's still a challenge for us because the demand is not stopping. So we made the best decisions that we could at the time. But those are some of the things that I would say we did well. And the other pieces, as far as, what we could have done better, some seem rather basic, but I think that it's good to let people know what we truly experienced, because any nugget that you could take from this for in the future to help you, certainly. And if anyone has questions with me offline that they'd like to ask on specifics of maybe what we did for safety and certain communication, absolutely would be more than happy to discuss. The communication was huge, and I think that frequently asked questions document was probably our most utilized and most commonly updated document that answered a lot of questions, and people liked it. I also did video updates, and we did it for our staff. And with the 365, Office 365, they could log in, have their office right up there, and they could see these videos to know real time what was happening. And I think it put a human element to it than just a memo. But where are we today? I think the good news is all our staff is back. Every member was back by the beginning of June. July, we had a record month. So COVID is really what turned that around for us. We predicted 5% volume increase every 2 weeks starting in May. And even our board said, well, don't you think that's a little fast? And we said, no, actually, we think that's conservative. But that's how we're doing our calculations, because we don't want to overstate anything, and we want to just be safe. So we had the highest bill charges ever in the history of the company in July, and the highest collected revenue. So from going from, mid-March, when we thought, holy cow, lab just started up, volumes dipped by 70%, are we going to make it? What is going to happen here? To working quickly, thinking quickly, having everyone tag team. No one had a title, no one had an ego. We just all pulled up our sleeves. We made kits. We did courier runs. We brought kits to clients. Anything that had to be done, we did. I think that's the only time they saw me in sweats and a T-shirt in this office, because we were in on a Saturday and Sunday making kits. But, we all pitched in, and this is how we ended up. So the billing out of COVID has been tremendous. And we right now, I'm waiting to get the final numbers, but it would look like through the end of July, we will be at year-to-date budget attainment. So just the turnaround, can't even describe how elated we are with that, but it's turning out well. We are considering the reinstatement of the merit increases. That is something I've got to say with our employees, although everyone is thankful to have a job, absolutely, and that there has been zero layoff. There are some that say, wow, you're billing out so much, we're having a good month, why can't you do this? Well, first we have to make everyone whole. Anyone who took a major pay cut, that comes first. We have to make them whole. And then we are looking at potentially reinstating the merit increases, because there are some hourly employees that this isn't a big amount of money, and to them it means the world, and they have been killing themselves, working extra hours, asking no questions, just showing up, and they're tired. So this is a goodwill gesture that we are taking a look at. As far as the bonuses, we have not made any decisions about that for the end of the year. My goal personally is, well, I think Dr. Roberts is, let's see how the year ends. We still do not know what is to come in October, November. Flu, some are predicting that flu might be lower this year because of the fact that not many people are out and they have masks on, and therefore the spread might be less. Not sure. Will we have another major outbreak when schools start for those who are in person? And then will we have any departments hit? You know, if one shift is hit and we have to have a quarantine, we're planning on, would we do it by shift? What would happen? So those are still unknown. I think being to date, year to date with our budget is a great thing, but I'm taking it week by week, month by month still. If we can end ahead for the year and make everybody whole, then yes, we could still pay bonuses. That would be outstanding, and we just haven't gotten there yet. So that's really the story of how Insight has survived. I try to be candid with what we've experienced just because I know no other way, and I think that's the best information to give. So certainly open for questions, and if anyone would like to talk offline, I'd certainly answer and guide in any way possible.
Well, thank you, Patty. And let's give Patty a virtual round of applause for a most excellent presentation. And we've had some questions come in, and I'll direct this one to Patty in particular. The question is, how did you use LinkedIn? Were you contacting people in your different network, or did you have a group that you were posing supply chain questions to?
I sent it out to everybody. I just literally put a post under my area. And many years ago, I can't remember who it was, but they said someone in your position should have a minimum of 2,000 contacts as a CEO. Well, I have 6,700, I believe. So I thought the power of numbers would work in my favor. So I actually just did a post out to all of my contacts to say, I need help with this specifically. Can anyone help? I would get a private message on the side saying, yes, I can, here's, et cetera. And then there would be some responses there, but some shared it. So that ended up multiplying it, sometimes up to getting it out to 20,000 people. I did it in 2 minutes. So I didn't have a set group. There is a COVID-19 page on LinkedIn. I looked that up and I used the hashtag so that anyone who was in that could see it. It would show up on their feed. But that right there helped me tremendously. Now, what didn't help was that some people would cloud my emails with, do you want to do telemarketing right now? And I was thinking, I have no time to think about that at this exact moment. I'm trying to get pipette tips, and I'm trying to make sure that we could run our testing. So anything extra at this moment isn't going to happen, but that is how I handle that.
That's very good. Okay, this is for both of you, Cory and Patty. How much business has returned relative to pre-pandemic levels in the routine test flow as opposed to COVID testing, hospital versus outpatient outreach? Why don't each of you take a shot at that?
I'll say from our standpoint, that's been a key component looking at our monthly financials is separating out COVID and not layering it in there. So we are about 98, 99% of our outpatient pre-COVID volumes. And we were about 11.5% ahead of last year through first quarter and even a little bit ahead of forecast before COVID hit. So that's fine. Hospitals are a little bit different and they vary depending on the hospital that that I'm talking about, but they're somewhere around 80% now.
Patty, how does that compare with what you're seeing?
For us, our outpatient is probably right up at the 100% mark. There are some instances where we are even higher than pre-COVID. We can't determine if that's people trying to make it up or people just aren't taking vacations this summer because they're actually home and they're actually going to those doctor appointments where they might have put them off. So in the hospitals, I do agree with Dr. Roberts as far as 80–90%. Each hospital is very unique. For instance, in the central and south area of Washington, there have been some outbreaks. So some of those volumes have gone down recently because of the outbreak, but yet they have flourished in other parts of the state. So overall, between 80 and 90%, so very happy.
Yes, and then we had a question come in. I'll read this to you because it's a Part A question. How have organizations who pay pathologists Part A reimbursement responded to the drop in hours related to COVID? Are they making exceptions to keep pathologists whole due to unforeseen circumstances? I would suspect that anybody who's got a Part A clinical pathology relationship with a hospital has had ample hours.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Patty.
Go ahead.
Well,
No, I'm done.
Well, I'd probably rather have you answer this, Frank. If I understand the question correctly, we've not had any issue because of hours spent on COVID testing, and overseeing COVID testing has definitely made up if there's any kind of burden like that within the contract, and our contracts are variable across the hospitals. So I can say we've seen no evidence whatsoever with that. And if I were facing that, that would be my argument, that if there is some pressure that those hours were made up due to COVID and will continue to be made up as people return. But I've not had any problems in any of our hospitals. Patty, sorry.
Yeah, we haven't either. And COVID has been, definitely its own beast.
Now, here's an interesting question. In your respective markets, have you noticed a shift to greater use of telehealth and virtual office visits by the physicians who are referring physicians? And if so, how are you handling the problem of collecting specimens from a patient who didn't go into a doctor's office?
I can answer that. We do require a doctor order. So on the telehealth, many have not done the diagnosis for COVID over the telehealth, at least as far as I'm concerned. We use 98.6, which is a program for all of our employees who can call and do telehealth. A lot of the fees have been lowered, if not eliminated, for people to utilize that. So they've called in to have discussions, but if it's ever COVID specifically, they are asked to go to their primary care physician to get a doctor order. Now, for our employees, we offer that testing to our employees, and we do have a rec, and our pathologists are the ordering physicians. So we're in a unique position where we can test our employees and we can get that back to them faster. But for other patients, yes, we've seen more with telemedicine. Our clients have stated that they've utilized it much more. In fact, they wish they had done it before because they're finding that it's actually easier than they thought and productive. But with COVID specifically, they do have to go in and they get an order, or they get sent an order, and then they could go to our PSC.
Yep. Cory.
Similar, the telehealth with regarding Anatomic, I'll take that side of it. We definitely saw an increase, a rather rapid increase, like on the derm side, where our understanding and talking to the clinicians, they did a lot of telehealth, and then they grouped those people together that needed biopsies. Obviously, they couldn't do the biopsy through telehealth. And so we saw sort of a bolus of patients on the early onset of reopening offices that had a higher biopsy ratio, if you will, than they did pre.
Interesting. So what I hear from both of you is telehealth hasn't quite displaced normal doctor visits at this juncture in early August.
I know clinicians I've spoken to found it greatly useful, and they're going to be ready again, but they have all gone back to the office within our outpatient areas, and they would rather see them in the office. So
let's shift telehealth to telepathology. What has happened within your respective practices to the longtime holdouts on adapting to a digital pathology arrangement?
Well, I think Dr. Roberts is already there with digital pathology. We have it to a degree, so I can tell you that it is certainly igniting more conversations. I'm very happy with that. Just as CEO, I'd like to see us go full bore with digital pathology. So those conversations are much more fruitful. And I'm hopeful that the holdouts will pay the bill.
Yeah, I think we're, as Patty said, we are right in the throes of it. And I think what it's going to do for us is it's going to accelerate that whole vision. So what I had hoped to maybe accomplish in 3 years, I expect to be more like 1 year. And I think we'll have many more scanners. I think we'll have many more people reading slides digitally. And if CLIA decides to stick with what the genie they've let out of the bottle, maybe the ProPath team is sitting all around the country, even if they're only reading slides, not preparing slides. So I think that's going to be a real key component of pathology moving forward, and certainly one that'll work well for us.
Interesting.
Agreed.
Well, we're running right up against the end of our session, and I want to thank you enthusiastically both for really valid information and things that are helpful. And all of the participants listening in, you can use your mobile app to ping Cory and Patty for sidebar conversations, and that's part of the networking experience of a live on-site meeting. And at the conclusion of this session, for all of you listening, we'd like you to complete your session feedback. There's a rate session button on the agenda page, either on your mobile app or on the web app on your desktop. And then we have a very interesting session coming up Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, Riverside Medical Center in California, how use of evidence-based decision support empowers the lab, improves stewardship, drives value-based care, particularly during the pandemic, because they had set up these ordering rules and utilization protocols pre-pandemic. And I think you're in for a very interesting session. Melissa Burke, who's Director of Lab Services at Riverside Health, is going to share her case study. And Dawn Flott from the Mayo Clinic is going to talk to you about the Mayo's role in all of this. And Ben Gold will be your guide and director for this. So I would like to once again thank our very eminent and esteemed speakers. We wish them well in the markets of Dallas and Spokane. And we'll sign off on this virtual War College session and consider it a most successful event. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.